Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am so excited today to introduce you to an amazing composer. Her name is Cecilia McDowall, and she is based in the UK. She's one of the most in demand composers right now in Britain. Her music is being performed all over the world. And the Amadeus Choir will be giving the Canadian premiere of her cantata called A Time for All Seasons in just about 10 days. So we are very excited to welcome Cecilia to the Chorus Effect. Hi, Cecilia.
Hello, hello. It's good to be here or there.
Everywhere, perhaps.
Mm.
Thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing, first of all? It's 2 years of pandemic. We're both musicians.
Mm.
Hanging in there.
I know it's been it's such a bleak landscape, isn't it? These last 2 years, and I think all the arts have had a terrible, terrible time, and particularly singing. And
Yeah.
I think this is the saddest thing, that singing is something that is so healthy, so important for our well-being. And of course, we were all deemed to be incredibly dangerous with
Yeah.
our aerosol particles. So
Yeah.
singing has been possibly the last thing to be welcomed again, because certainly in this country, we were restricted to very few singers. And at one point, things looked as though they were going to go ahead. And then we found that no more than 8 singers were allowed to sing if they were professional.
Mm.
So choirs couldn't sing, and that's a lot of people, a lot of choirs. So when we started singing again and music was being sung again, it was one of those moments that made you feel, I'll never again um, not value what we've had, because
Yeah.
it's so precious. And it must have been the same for you.
Absolutely. And with the Amadeus Choir, we stayed connected over Zoom and did a whole bunch of digital projects and experimented with technology in a million different ways, but none of it comes close to that feeling of
Mm.
that the moment I missed the most was the breath, the whole choir taking that breath together before the beginning of the piece, because that's what you can't get with any digital simulation. We miss that collective experience.
Yes, and of course it's the breath, isn't it, that was so dangerous. No,
Right.
yes.
Exactly. The very thing that
Mm.
it defines what we
Yeah,
do was the thing
yeah.
that
Mm.
that shut us down. But we are back singing safely,
Mm.
masked, distanced, all of these things. But it's worth it. It's absolutely worth it
Yeah.
to be singing together.
And of course, the other thing that is so crucial with singing is it's a community thing,
Hmm.
and we're all together, and there's real value in being with each other, sharing experiences, and Zoom really didn't cut it.
It did. It did it.
Mm.
But it opened up opportunities like this. We started this podcast series over the course of the pandemic to get to know people like you. And I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now if it weren't for that little nudge in that direction. Let me ask you how you came to be a composer. Tell us your story, your entrance into music, choral music specifically, and how you ended up where you are.
Ah, right. Okay. Well, I do come from a musical background. My
Mm.
father was principal flute at the Royal Opera House, and he was also
Wow.
a soloist with playing with all sorts of chamber ensembles,
Yeah.
with some quite well-known performers. So there was always music in the house, and I was often there at rehearsals, sometimes turning pages.
Wow.
So, so that was all really helpful. For some reason, I really can't put my finger on it, but I took a long time to actually make the decision to become a composer. I taught for many years. I taught in conservatoires, and I taught in specialist school, one called the Yehudi Menuhin School,
Mhm.
for talented musicians. And it was really, I suppose I would have been about 49, 50 when I thought, if I'm going to do it, I better do it now before I die. So that was about 20 years ago. The other thing is, I was at a school that prized choral singing, and the school was very close to Westminster Abbey, and it
Mm.
meant that for every special choral occasion, we would go to Westminster Abbey. And sometimes be part of the performances there that needed the ripieno for the St. Matthew Passion. So singing under people like David Wilcox,
Of course. Yeah.
and many others. In fact, the organist at the time has just died. Actually, he died on Friday. Simon
Oh,
Preston.
wow. Oh
Uh,
my goodness.
yeah,
Wow.
and I remember as schoolgirls, we were absolutely entranced by him because, of course, we were up in the organ loft and
Uh-huh.
quite breathtaking watching his feet
Yeah.
with the patent leather shoes, and I think
Yep.
that's quite interesting. Yeah. So yes, singing. I've always loved singing. I do write all sorts of different kinds of music. I write chamber music and orchestral music, but I have a particular love of writing choral music, and I love writing for the voice.
Yes, and we love singing it. It's clear that you have an understanding of the voice, but it's so far from simplistic or trite with which you get from some of the composers who are pumping out publications these days. But your music has such depth and richness and complexity without it being inaccessible, and that's what I love about it. And we're loving working on it.
Oh.
Um, and one thing that fascinates me about your composition is the way you work with text. Could you
Mm.
speak to that a little bit? Because you draw from really old texts, and then sometimes you work with new poetry, and that's the case in A Time for All Seasons, which we'll be singing, and I believe also the case in some of your other work. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Yes, exactly. I do set all sorts of texts, ranging from Shakespeare, the Bible, Christina Rossetti. In fact, my publisher did say that they're all good because they're out of copyright.
Yeah,
However,
I know.
it is always fun to work with a poet, and with this particular one, with Kevin Crossley Holland, we discussed it and we talked a lot about what we wanted to do with this. So we centered everything in our thinking around the Ecclesiastes, which I think is a wonderful chunk of the Bible, and I think that he really gave such thought to the the, the circumstances around that particular text, and whether it's inspired directly by it, I'm not sure that it is, but it sort of feeds into that. But I have on many occasions actually had an idea and gone to a poet I love working with. I've worked with a number of poets. Another poet I've worked a lot with is Sean Street,
Mm.
and he's a broadcaster and a poet, and he's done a lot of work in Nova Scotia,
Oh,
incidentally.
really?
He's come over a lot to Halifax and has a strong connection there with one of the broadcasters there. But what I always find interesting is finding the story, and
Mm.
not particularly with this work, but with a number of other works, I I find it really interesting to look for something not self-consciously, but in a way that I hope might be interesting to the listener and to the performer, and that might
Mm.
actually introduce a new idea and perhaps stimulate exploration of it. So there are other works that I've worked in that way with.
Yes, and I know you have a piece with a very profound story that was released on CD recently. Could you tell us a bit about the girl from Aleppo?
Yes, The Girl from Aleppo. This was a commission from the National Children's Choir of Great Britain, and the commissioning brief was really something quite daunting, which was to write something about children in conflict.
Mm.
You know, when you think about that and think that, well, children are actually going to be singing this, so it's quite a gritty subject. But Kevin Crossley Holland, again, who of course has written Time for All Seasons, met a remarkable girl called Nuji Mustafa when he was at a literary festival in Dubai, and she had just co-written with an English journalist, somebody called Christina Lamb, a book
Mm.
called The Girl from Aleppo, and he was transfixed by her story because she being a Kurdish refugee living in Syria, living in Aleppo, had fled the country when the bombs started to fall. And at that time, the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, had invited 1 million people to come and live in Germany as a result of that. And so this girl was pushed in her wheelchair because she has cerebral palsy by her sister 3,500 miles through, I think, 9 countries. And some of the countries wouldn't let them in. Hungary, for instance, said, no, you can't come in here. So it meant they had to go round again and into another country. And it is the most extraordinary story. But I think what's also really fascinating about this particular girl is that she learned English by watching television. So next somebody says, no, you can't watch television, you might say, well, I'm actually learning a new language here. She was, because of her condition, she was unable to go to school. So she lived, I think, on a 5th floor, unable to get out. So she was really confined to the flat. And what happened as she travelled was she became the leader of her group, and she was able to communicate with border guards. And it was that she met BBC correspondents who then focused on her. But it is a story for our time. It's an appalling thing to say, isn't it? About an outpouring of people. One of the things she said was, these were educated people. They were teachers, professors, lawyers, all being driven from their country. And of course, it's going on right now in Ukraine.
Of course.
It's
Yeah.
absolutely grim. Yeah.
A highly specific story that has such universal and widespread relevance and resonance right now.
Yeah.
It's very powerful, the way that you engage with those stories and bring them to an audience that in a way that is very moving.
Oh, well, one hopes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What are you working on right now?
The piece that I'm writing, I'm in the middle of writing it at the moment, is all to do with the Mayflower Pilgrims who came to America in 1620. And because 2020 was going to be the 400th year anniversary of their arrival, the performance was supposed to be then, but it didn't happen. And so everything has been put back. And so I'm writing it now. And it's a piece for, again, it's a violin solo with a cappella choir. And the text is taken from real life stuff. The governor of the Plymouth colony was called William Bradford, and so I've taken some of his text to create this, but also he wrote a poem because something happened just after they came to what then became the Americas, America. He went ashore to prospect, and in his absence, his wife, who was probably around about 23, slipped overboard and died. She fell into the bay, and nobody knows why this was. Having read about it, I feel it's possibly because all these people had come from Holland, and she had had to leave her 3-year-old boy behind with her parents. And of course, there's a feeling, will I ever see them again? So this is a story about arriving at Plymouth Rock, and how they began building their houses and establishing their settlement there. Yes, so that will be premiered in a couple of months' time. Yeah.
You're drawn to challenging stories in your work. It sounds like.
I find them interesting, and of course, if the words are right, they stimulate, don't they? I find it's more challenging, I think, to write something that doesn't commit in that way. Yeah.
When you're working with a choir who's commissioned you, we have a number of conductors and choral community folks that may watch this interview, what direction or advice would you give them for starting out on a commissioning process? Is it best when they come to you with that story, that idea, really specific purpose for the commission? Or do you prefer a more open-ended kind of exploration or a dialogue? How does that work for you?
It's interesting because I think every single commission is entirely different, and I rather like the variety. I mean, I've enjoyed it sometimes when somebody's come to me and said, "I've got a specific text which I want to use," and that's good because in a way it's a discipline. You have the text and you know that you're committed to doing that, and you know that's what the choir is and the commissioner is wanting. There are other times when I discuss with the commissioner what it is they want, and sometimes it's for an anniversary. I mean, for instance, there's a piece that was premiered on Sunday night with the Iowa City Chamber Singers.
Oh,
And that was a piece called Music of the Stars. And each movement is to do with an element of diversity. But what was lovely there was we were in communication with each other. They would suggest something and I would say, I'm going to get that, that's going to be difficult for copyright reasons,
mm,
or I would suggest something. So it was a sort of two-way process. And I feel in that way, I feel it's very democratic. You somehow arrive at something you hope each party will enjoy. And then there are other times when I'm completely left up to my own devices. I can do anything I like, within reason. And for instance, there was a piece that I wrote a few years back in 2012, which was about an American aviatrix called Harriet Quimby.
mm,
Hardly anybody's ever heard of her, and there was a very clear reason for this. She, amazing woman, flew from my country, UK, England, across the English Channel to France in 1912 in the fog, and she landed the plane successfully, no accidents, and it took her just under an hour to do that. A remarkable thing to do.
wow.
Who's heard of her? And of course, the reason for that is it's the same time that the Titanic sank.
Wow.
And because of that, the Titanic news, horrific that it was, dominated the news for weeks. So I know when it has been performed in the States, and I remember saying to some conductors, "Have you come across Harriet Quimby?" And the answer is no, never heard of her. And it's an extraordinary story because she then went on to fly a plane around Boston as a demonstration in a Louis Blériot plane, which was a new thing, and it pitched forward and it threw her out and her passenger, and she fell to the ground and died. And
Ah,
that was in the same year. She was young. I don't know how old, but she was a remarkable woman.
but pioneering, and I'm sure had contributions to the field that lasted beyond her tragic death, but we didn't get to hear about those
Yeah.
uh,
Yes.
just
Yeah.
because of the timing until your piece, perhaps.
Well,
Amazing.
who knows?
Uh,
Who knows? But it's again, it's another example of thinking, if I find it interesting, possibly other people might find it interesting. So it's
yeah.
lovely to feel you can introduce an idea and maybe stimulate somebody to go and find out more about it. Yeah.
Yeah, how exciting, and what a privilege as an artist to be able to do that.
Yeah.
You're also widely published. Oxford is would you say is your primary publisher?
Yes. I think they call it house composer with
Hmm.
Oxford University Press. I do have music published by a number of other publishers as well, but the main one, First Refusal, is OUP. Um, it's,
And for any composers or conductors who are commissioning and wanting to get the music that they commission out into the world, any advice for starting out as a composer, getting your works into the hands of the right people, or even composing in a way that the publisher is going to be interested in?
Right. It is interesting. I think now is a better climate for that, isn't it? When one thinks back, it was also complex and cumbersome. But I think now, because technology is what it is, every composer produces their own score. It wasn't always that way, because I remember when I first set out that I had to get a copyist to write my orchestral parts, and it used up the whole commission money. So everything has changed. So that I think is a great thing, because we are in control of our material. I always feel that the best thing really is getting performances. Speaking to conductors like yourself, encouraging groups to do something of theirs. So I feel every time there's a performance, someone hears it, you can record it, and I think in a way, I sort of feel that's more important than getting it published. Getting it published is then the next stage, and of course that's wonderful, particularly if you have a publisher, as you do, who will distribute things and give much more publicity to the work. So and persistence. I think it's just keeping at it really, and I'm quite sure it's the same with everything, isn't it? If you really really want to do it, you will always find a way into it. And sometimes, I mean, you must find this. Sometimes it's word of mouth, isn't it? Someone has performed something, likes it, communicates it to someone else. But then you
And
have
having that advocate, having a
yeah,
conductor who champions your work and says, "Have you heard of this piece? It's not published yet, but you should do it." And
yes,
then bringing it kind of into the public eye. But thank you for reframing it that way, because the end goal is not the publication. The
yeah,
goal is to have it performed. So
it
if it's
is.
chicken and egg, you may as well,
It is,
go
isn't it?
for the egg. I don't know if that's the metaphor, but go for
Yeah,
the performances, which will then perhaps lead to publication, which in turn leads to more performances.
yes, that's what I feel. Yes, it's the performances first and then publication. And of course, in a way, we are all our own publishers too, aren't we? Because
Mhm.
if we want to communicate something to somebody, we can use social media and other all sorts of things in order to advertise that the work
Yeah,
exists, and share these things as well. So all
yeah.
sorts of possibilities. Yeah.
We're coming up on our big national choral conference here in Canada this weekend called
Oh, cool.
Podium.
Podium. Yes.
And
Yeah.
and it looks actually like there's a number of international people coming. So those kinds of opportunities to meet your colleagues, sometimes it feels like we're in a bubble in our silo getting our work done and planning concerts, but there's this rich community of people, and generally folks like yourself are so willing to chat or
Yeah.
advocate or partner up.
Oh, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's lovely to be able to share things, and also we as composers learn a lot from you conductors as well, conductors and composers. So
Mhm.
it's a two-way thing. I hope and I feel. Yeah.
Yeah. I have
Yeah.
one more question for you.
Yeah.
And then if you are listening, please do leave a comment either on YouTube or on Facebook. The comment will come through to my system here and I can pose it to Cecilia for you. But Cecilia, I wanted to ask, in your composing for professional choirs, I know you've worked with the 16, with other highly professional choirs, but also with children's choirs, with
Mhm.
church choirs, communities, and then orchestras, professional and otherwise. I would love to know what they have in common in terms of your approach to that work, or what you might alter depending on the
Mm.
group that you're writing for.
Ooh, that's a difficult one. I suppose with every commission, and I'm sure you find this as well, that the most important thing is listening to the commissioner to find out what it is that's wanted, how long it is, where it's going to be, because I think that's another thing, isn't it?
Mm,
But I've had I had something that was performed as part of a St. Cecilia service in St. Paul's Cathedral some years ago, and I remember going there to meet the director of music at St. Paul's, and he was saying use the acoustic, and it's a wonderful. It's not like anything else. Well, it probably is like other things, but it's got an 8-second delay. So in some ways, I think that the acoustic can play a part of the. It's a bit like another instrument in the
Cool.
composition process. So I think listening to commissioner is something I think is really important. Also, the other thing that I really like to do is to listen to the group who's commissioned it. So if it's an amateur group, I like to hear what they've done in the past, just to get an idea of what their range of capability might be. Same with children's voices. With professional singers, I've often heard them sing anyway, so I have a rough idea of it. It gives a different kind of freedom, because in a way you know you can sort of more or less do what you want to do. But I do find that with amateur choirs, I do think quite carefully about how I write things. And the other thing, which may sound a bit daft, is that when I've written something, I like to sing it through myself, and it doesn't matter what part it is. I mean, even if it's the bass part, I'll sing it up an octave or occasionally get down there. But then I have a real sense of what it's like in a linear way, what it might be like to sing. And I sort of feel that's quite important to know what it's going to be like from the inside. And sometimes I change things because I think that it might be awkward, or even thinking about how does a particular line, how do the sopranos know that they've got to come in on that top E flat? So maybe it's in the accompaniment somewhere, so that they pick up the sound. So it's all those little bits and pieces that go together. And I think actually all of them apply to everything, whatever we're doing. It's a sort of universal calculator. Yeah.
And even in the works that are for professional ensembles, there's those, I mean, those things aren't only for ease of performance, but I think for coherence of the piece, it's often a nice musical device to have the note in the piano that leads into the tenor entrance or whatever it's going to be. Really kind of weaves the piece together. It's very tightly knit, certainly in your music. It's much appreciated.
Yes. The secret is to try and not make it too obvious. Yes.
Yeah. You have an exciting performance coming up, I believe.
Well, I've just had 2 this last Sunday. I've got the Bach Choir in London is singing something on Thursday. The London Mozart Players an orchestral piece of mine on Friday, and on Saturday, the London Mozart Players, again with another fine group, are doing a piece called Shipping Forecast, which interestingly sets a poem by Sean Street, who was working on the broadcast. Oh, well, let me get this right. The broadcast fisheries of Nova Scotia.
Oh,
yeah. So there are names in there like Funk Island and I've forgotten the names now, but the bays there, or the bays that appeared, because I think the fisheries broadcast, I think is what it's called.
Yes, yeah.
That's right. It sort of materialized in something like the 1950s.
Sounds right.
Because the shipping forecast in this country materialized, I don't know, in the 19th century, when people kept driving their boats onto rocks. So yes, and we still have the broadcast on the radio, and I find it really quite. It's like a prayer. It's like an incantation. It's beautiful, and it doesn't make any sense to rain, good, fair. You get these things that seem to be related to each other, but they're not. So it's
I'm very interested in that because I'm from Newfoundland on the far east coast, and my predecessor Lydia Adams with the Amadeus Choir, who incidentally studied with or was a friend and mentored by David Wilcox, is a Nova Scotian, a Cape Brettoner, and so I'm sure we're both very familiar and our families with the fisheries broadcast. So we should check out that work. That sounds very interesting.
Wonderful. Yeah.
So do you go to all of these premieres and performances that you have when you must be full time just attending?
Well, yeah. I mean, I go if I'm invited and I can do it. And for instance, this week I happen to be going to all 3. There is one coming up, which I know I've mentioned before, which is quite exciting. On June the 3rd, the Queens Jubilee over here, there's going to be a special concert for Her Majesty, the Queen, and it will be in St George's Chapel, Windsor Castle, and it is called the Jubilate Deo, and that was performed last Sunday by the St Michael and All Angels several choirs in Dallas. So
wow.
on June the 3rd, it will be the UK premiere.
In the presence of Her Majesty.
Well, who knows?
Who knows?
At the
It's
moment,
in her honor anyway.
yes, at the moment, she's not doing everything. I think that there will be royalty there, but it may not be Her Majesty.
Amazing. Well, you'll make yourself available for that one, I suppose.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I'll be going
You won't
there,
be busy
yes.
on that night. I actually, fun fact, sang in a children's choir and tap danced for the Queen's 50th Jubilee at Roy Thompson Hall in Toronto. This is my claim to fame, that I have indeed tap danced for the Queen.
God, you danced. Gosh,
It was the only time I've tap danced in public was
really?
for
Gosh, that's
for
amazing.
the Queen at Roy Thompson Hall when I was 12. Yes.
That's so good. And presumably you did American time steps and all those things.
I wouldn't even know. We
Oh,
have not questions, but just some lovely comments from our viewers that I can pop up on the screen for you. John is a bass in the Amadeus Choir. Looking forward to seeing your piece. I'm enjoying it very much. Thanks for doing this. Very interesting. Thank you, John.
lovely.
And Jane is a second soprano, loves the harmonies, especially the second soprano line. I'm a second soprano too, Jane. And the text being new to Kevin's poetry and the cover of the score. Did you have anything to do with the cover of the score?
That's an interesting one. Yes, I did. I was really quite insistent on that. Because it's so long ago, I can't remember. They are from the Book of Hours, and there are scenes from every month, and I thought they were just exquisite. So I suggested to OUP that they could perhaps use them. So they did, which was wonderful.
Let me see if I can.
Because that's a very positive thing. Occasionally, I have conversations with my publisher about covers, because I personally feel it's quite important to have a cover that suggests something and draws you in. So it's lovely to know that. That's a nice comment. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to try to just put that up on our screen here. Let me see if this works. Did that work? Nope. Give me one more chance. Share screen. Chrome tab. Time for all seasons. Share. There. You can see it
lovely.
on the site. It is beautiful, and the colors are so vibrant.
They are vibrant. It's that blue, actually. I have an absolute love of that blue. And I just feel it's so restoring, vibrant.
Yeah. And that's the sense of renewal that comes through this piece. I mean, it's quite a dark piece at times, talking about.
Yeah. Well, yes, the end is really.
Yes, but it is a time for all seasons, and I think that hopefully the message of the piece is that the time is now to act and to try to do what we can to reverse the climate crisis.
I know. Yes. Good heavens.
We have some other really nice comments. Maureen is also a member.
Lovely. Yeah.
And Gerda. Oh, hi, Gerda.
Oh,
I'll look forward to listening to selections. Oh, do you still conduct your works or do workshops with your music?
I don't conduct. Partly because I like to leave it to those who know what they're doing. But I do take part in workshops. So which is always
excellent.
Great. Yeah. And just one little thing about being a composer, I think it's the same as being an artist, a writer, all of these things. It's a solitary business. So there's so much time spent in isolation. Although I have to say, in the pandemic, I struggled with that, because that was a different kind of isolation. That was an isolation of being cut off from inspiration, being cut off from your friends, being cut off from going to concerts and museums and so on. But the thing that I absolutely love about working with choirs is you get to meet them, and they're all always such interesting, lovely people. And so that I feel is the real bonus of writing choral music, that you get to meet the choirs. Yes. Not always, but very often. So
Yeah.
that's quite a
And there's a culture of working with composers, I think, a lot more. I know, at least in Canada, I mean, most choirs I know have some sort of commissioning program,
yeah.
and often really engage with those composers and bring them in or get a grant to fly them in or whatever it's going to be. And so there is a lot of dialogue between choirs and composers, I think, more than other classical music
That's interesting.
types of
Yeah.
ensemble.
Yes. Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
that just feels to me like the way to go, and it's the sort of symbiotic, shared experience. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm. Yeah.
absolutely. This
Yeah.
is Julie.
So nice.
Uh,
Oh, that's
Yes, it's true. Everyone has a fun line.
interesting. Oh, yes. And it's very touching when somebody says that, because I think the other thing is, in a way, one has absolutely no idea how what one writes is going to be received, and in a way, it's gone, so it's
Mm,
out there, and
yeah.
I always hope that it perhaps does what people hope it will be doing.
Do you find that scary, like when you press send on the final copy and it's out of your hands and they will do what they'll do in the premiere? Is that scary to you, or freeing, or?
Not really. I find it quite exciting to actually release it and let it go, because I do spend quite a lot of time making sure that I'm really happy with it before it goes,
Yeah.
and I don't often amend things afterwards. So yeah, but in a way, I mean, I feel that's what happens, isn't it? It goes out there, and yeah, it's
It's sort of thrilling. I love it personally because I get to feel like I'm being taken along for a ride instead of driving the bus. Like, and
yes,
because I do both things,
well,
if I have
great,
a piece being
yes,
performed, I get to sit back and kind of experience it with new eyes. And it's I certainly have butterflies, but it is a real thrill in a
yeah.
different way than when you're directly involved as a performer.
And I suppose you, when you're conducting, you are thinking in an entirely different way. Of course, you have
Yep.
to, because so much is going through your mind, and so many people to look after. But in
Yeah.
fact, I'm sure you find this as well, that when you're listening to a piece, particularly for the first time, it's a most incredibly intense process,
Mhm.
listening to every single note. Uh, yeah.
Yes, indeed. But a privilege to have that experience, and a privilege to conduct and work with composers
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
yourself.
I feel you have the best of both worlds, and I suspect do you find this, that one informs the other? Yeah.
Certainly, I hope so. I like to
Yeah.
think that I try to keep the composer's interests in mind when I'm
Mm,
working as a conductor, and that when I'm writing, I try to,
yeah.
be kind to the conductor on the other side, and even things as
Mhm.
little as like breath marks and
Oh, I know.
cutoffs, and like try to be sympathetic to save
Yeah.
rehearsal time on that stuff. And
Yes.
so
Because
I
that,
try.
I think, is an interesting thing, that the rehearsal time, because I know I've been very aware that when I've written sacred pieces, I have thought too it's quite important for a church choir to be able to pick something up quickly,
Yeah.
because sometimes there's only half an hour rehearsal, and you have to do the psalms and the hymns, and
Yeah.
other things as well. So I quite like to think how it can be as practical as possible.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then it will get performed more and will
Yeah.
get out there, which is the goal. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh.
Well, thank you so much, Cecilia. We'll be sure to send you an update after our concert, which is on the 28th. And we'll hope to stay in touch. It would be wonderful to work with you in person
Oh.
sometime.
Well, that would be wonderful. Absolutely lovely. Never been to
Yeah.
Canada, so
Ah, it's a shame. We'll
yes,
get you
no,
here. We'll get
yes,
you here at some point.
yes.
Uh,
Thank you so much. And please do give my warmest wishes to all your singers, I think. And the comments have been so touching. Very
Thank you
lovely.
so much. I will absolutely pass those on. Good luck with everything. Bye.
Thank you very much.